Welcome to Limited Engagement. My name's Melissa Barclay, and joining me today is Dan O'Donnell. You may recognize him from the Making a Murderer docuseries on Netflix, and I'm sure you've been getting a lot of phone calls lately.
Yes.
You've been a very popular guy. You were one of the reporters in the docuseries. And tell me a little bit about your background. I find it very unique that you have a law degree. And that's why I specifically wanted to talk to you, because I think that's you have a very unique perspective when it comes to viewing a case because of that. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the case at first.
Well, it's actually really interesting. I was only about 25 when I started covering the case, from the time that we had a trial set through jury selection, and then I actually went up to Chilton to cover the duration of the case, and it was specifically because I had just graduated from the University of Wisconsin Law School, and the station that I was working at the time, WTMJ, said, you're the perfect person to sort of be embedded and give a perspective that others might not have with your knowledge of the rules of evidence and criminal law and that sort of stuff. So for a while, I was the crime reporter for the state of Wisconsin, and I was filing reports for ABC News and all of this. I think it was a unique kind of perspective. What happened was I was working at TMJ, from the time I was 19, and I was hired out of law school, and I said, you know what, this is what I really want to do. It's what I'm really passionate about, is broadcasting. So let's give that a whirl. And if it doesn't work out, I'll practice law. But here I am, 10 years later.
You have a nice fallback method, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you ever think when you were doing and covering this case that almost 10 years later, it would become what it is now? It really is like a worldwide phenomenon, and people cannot stop talking about it. Back then, did you think, this case was going to be done in like a month, and then I'd just move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that the young ladies were doing a documentary series.
Oh, you did?
We thought it was a documentary film that they were doing. I mean, they weren't even sure what they were doing. Right. They just moved from New York to do this, and I think I signed a release to be in it, and everybody involved signed a release and all that. And so many years went by, I don't think anybody thought that either the film was ever made, or a lot of times what happens with documentaries is they get made and nobody ever picks them up. So I thought that that's what happened. I'll admit, I forgot all about the documentary filmmakers.
So did they contact you before, like, hey, it's coming out on Netflix?
No, not at all. Just, I saw a press release from Netflix, and I was like, oh, awesome. I had a sense of pride. I was like, hey, Laura and Moira, I remember them. I sat kind of kitty corner from them in our little workspace in the basement of the Calumet County Courthouse. And, I never realized that it would be this big. I never thought that it would be this global phenomenon.
Right. So all the legal terms that I'm sure a lot of other people maybe don't know the exact definition of, but do you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Steven Avery murdered Teresa Halbach?
Yes, I do.
And that justice was served?
Yes, justice absolutely was served. And the problem, I think, arises because a lot of people who don't have a legal background confuse any doubt with reasonable doubt.
Absolutely.
And reasonable doubt is never concretely defined in the law. It's generally accepted to be that which would give a reasonable person doubt as to a person's guilt. Now, what I have been saying is that any doubt is not reasonable doubt. And it is not reasonable to base reasonable doubt on a conspiracy to plant evidence unless there is affirmative evidence that that conspiracy existed. To me, neither Making a Murderer nor Steven Avery's defense at trial, which, let's face it, Making a Murderer is nothing more than Steven Avery's defense. It was 100% based on the defense presented at trial and nothing more. It added no other evidence. It added nothing else. It was just the evidence presented at trial. Nowhere was there affirmative evidence of anyone planting any evidence against Steven Avery. There was just innuendo and insinuations based on supposed motivation, a motive to do so, and the circumstance that these deputies, Lenk and Colburn, James Lenk and Andrew Colburn, would have had the opportunity to plant. Based only on that, that doesn't make a conspiracy unless you concretely tie all of this together. And that is never done. it's not reasonable to believe in that conspiracy when all of the available evidence is pointing at Steven Avery. And the confession by Brendan Dassey, which I do not believe was coerced at all, clearly points to Steven Avery as manipulating Brendan Dassey into helping him commit this horrible crime.
So let's talk about reasonable doubt for just a second longer. How do you, okay, we know the legal definition of it. How do you feel jurors go into a trial defining it? Are they given the definition prior to that? Okay, I've never been on a jury trial.
They are told, and the instruction is generally different. I believe there's supposed to be a standardized jury instruction, but it basically amounts to reasonable doubt is not any doubt. Okay, so it's like if you have some doubt, but it's not substantial enough to rise to that level. Now, this is a great burden that the state would have to make. But I find it really interesting that in the weeks since Making a Murderer has come out.
Because it's been out for like a month.
It's been out for about a month or so. And especially since my rebuttal has come out, it has gone from, the supporters of Steven Avery have gone from saying, there was a clear conspiracy. The cops were out to get Steven Avery. That's almost all gone. Now it's, well, the prosecution didn't present enough evidence. There was reasonable doubt. That's a big switch. The entire premise of Making a Murderer was the cops planted evidence to frame this guy because they were worried about a $36 million lawsuit. All right? There was no evidence of that. There was no real, honest-to-goodness evidence of that. And one of the biggest motivations, right, the two guys that keep getting mentioned, right, James Lank, Andrew Colburn, they were not defendants in that lawsuit. Nobody realizes this. They were deposed, yes. They were given depositions a couple of weeks before Teresa Halbach went missing. They were deposed as witnesses, not defendants, witnesses. All right? That almost 100% eliminates their motivation. All right? You work for a radio station, I work for a radio station. If the station gets sued, we're not personally liable. I wouldn't bear any responsibility for that, okay? Our insurance company would. So that's a big, big motivation by Lank and Colburn that's eliminated by facts that simply weren't presented in Making a Murderer.
Okay, I want you to give me what you think were the strongest points, the three strongest points from the state's case, and the three strongest points from the defense's case. Could you just name, like, off the bat?
Off the top of my head...
and that's kind of a lot to, like, ask, but, yeah.
One, a bullet that was proven to have been fired from Steven Avery's gun that the defense did not even challenge. This bullet, this fragment from this bullet was from Steven Avery's gun. That was established. It had Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. Now, they tried to attack the credibility of the test because a control sample at the state crime lab was contaminated.
Yes, I remember that part.
The bullet fragment was never contaminated, all right? It had Teresa Halbach's DNA on it, all right? That was not challenged. They tried to say, well, the test should have been thrown out because the control sample was contaminated. But it wasn't the actual evidence that was contaminated. It was another control sample. So the bullet fragment still had Teresa Halbach's DNA on it, all right? There's no way around that. The bullet fragment found in the garage. Her bones, her charred remains, found in the burn pit, number 2. Along with it, and this is never presented in Making a Murderer.
You're going to say the tooth.
Nope.
No.
The tooth, well, it was her tooth. Okay. Yes, the tooth. The contents of her purse, her camera, her personal digital assistant, her cell phone, all burned, and this is key, intertwined with steel belts from tires that Brendan Dassey said Steven Avery put on the fire to make it burn a little bit hotter. Okay? Intertwined with it. They're kind of melded in with the steel belts from the tires. That's huge. Moreover, the car, with his blood and her blood in the trunk. Now people say, well, wait a second. If they just took her out to this burn pit right outside to burn her, why put her in the back of the trunk and get her bloody hair all over the side?
Do you think there was enough blood in the car, though? There was like a little bit, I'm just playing devil's advocate, but there was a little bit of blood. If someone was, brutally attacked,
no.
Wouldn't there be a lot of blood?
Well, you'd think.
Yeah.
Okay, you would think, but
right.
that's another thing that is not fully explained. A .22 caliber bullet is not. We get all of our brutal crime knowledge mostly from television.
Sure.
So when we see someone shot, it's this blood explodes, right? It's not how it happens in real life. A .22 can actually enter into somebody's skull and produce very little blood, in fact, possibly just a trickle, because it's a slow-moving bullet and it doesn't hit with a lot of force. It's stunning, and people never believe me when I tell them, but it's true. The blood would have been in her head, absorbed by her hair. So she's, got blood in her hair. Her body is placed in the trunk of the car. That's where the blood in the trunk of the car goes. Dassey actually said in his confession, Avery was originally going to take her body to a pond and dump it there, and possibly dump the car there too. Turned out that pond had dried up. So they took the body back, unloaded it, put it on the fire. All right? That is very clear physical evidence. Add to that, I'll give you a bonus one. Why on earth would Steven Avery specifically request Teresa Halbach the day she disappeared, and then use star 67 twice to hide his phone number? If he was just calling for a photograph appointment, he'd wanted her to know who it was, right? But he didn't, right? He specifically wanted her. The three strongest pieces of evidence, if you could call them that, for the defense, were all circumstantial. 100% circumstantial. The fact that James Lenk, who was deposed as a witness, not as a defendant in this lawsuit, remember, found the car key with Avery's sweat DNA or touch DNA on the car key in his bedroom as he's like shaking a bookshelf and the key falls out, right?
But wasn't that was like on the... Was that the first time he went into the apartment?
That
like the
was
third or fourth, maybe?
The first time he was there.
That Link was there.
What happened was they searched the property.
Right.
It's a 40-acre property. It wasn't until, and people are confused about this, why they went back, was because they had the confession from Dassey. All of a sudden, they knew where the murder took place. All of a sudden, they knew she was raped on this bed. They knew to go and look through this with a fine-toothed comb. This is another thing we get wrong from watching television shows like CSI. We think that the authorities are digging apart everything and, searching through every little thing. That's not true. When they've got 40 acres to search, and she could have been killed anywhere on this property. Okay.
So they're saying it was on the mattress and in the bedroom, but yet there was no. And I'm just picking apart the documentary, but there was no physical evidence.
No, actually, she was not killed on the mattress. She was not stabbed on the mattress.
Okay.
She was not any of that. In fact, Dassey tried to say that.
Okay.
But then in his confession, the interrogators picked up on it right away, and they said, "No, Brendan, you're lying. You said you grabbed the knife in the garage and then stabbed her." So, okay, yeah, there's no blood on the mattress. Well, she wasn't shot or stabbed on the mattress.
Where do you think she was shot and
the garage.
stabbed? Even though
in the garage.
Wasn't there like a little spot of blood found like way in the corner or something?
No,
but
there was
no blood.
There was no blood found.
Do you think they cleaned it that well?
I don't believe that they needed to clean it all that well. In fact, Dassey actually said we used her clothes, which we then burned, to mop up the blood. And we think, okay, well, blood is going to be there. We'll be able to pick up DNA evidence forever. That's also not true. There's a million different variables that go into how long DNA evidence will be traceable and will be picked up, will last. It's entirely possible. They could have gotten partial DNA, but because you can't match it, it's worthless. It's useless. Okay, so just because you don't get a full strand that's able to be identified as Dassey Avery or Teresa Halbach, and this is a big misconception. Also, as I said, if he's stabbing her, if Dassey, as Dassey says, he stabs her as a non-fatal wound, well, unless you hit a major artery, you're also not going to spurt out blood, okay? And if these are non-fatal wounds, it stands to reason that there wouldn't be blood spurting all over the place. All right, so what the evidence, quote unquote, that the defense bases its theories on relies on you, the viewer, relies on you, the juror, to fill in the gaps with your own relative ignorance based on your knowledge of criminal law only coming from television, of how crime scenes actually look, how they should look, okay? We expect, because of CSI, and there's actually something in the law called the CSI effect, that it's like jurors expect mountains of physical evidence. It's not true. It's not how it works. I could put my finger press it down on this table, 20 minutes later, it is possible you would not be able to get my fingerprint off of that. Again, with fingerprints, million different variables. Humidity in the air, air temperature, how much dust is in the air. It may or may not leave a lasting print.